No wonder they're getting ready to pull out. Well, fasten your seatbelt. It's going to be a bumpy night. It's the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway. The mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway. The world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
I don't know what it costs to get Leo DiCaprio to endorse you. Maybe nothing. It reportedly cost $10 million for Beyoncé to appear on stage with Kamala Harris. Most of the people there were following the media spin that she was going to give a concert, but in the end, she only made a speech, and her speeches are not nearly as riveting as her singing performances. Most of them left extremely disgruntled, which is the pattern now of the Kamala Harris campaign. She is becoming more and more frenetic, aggressive, hostile to interviewers and members of the public alike. She's a sinking ship. Maybe that's why Leonardo DiCaprio got on board. She is going down to the biggest landslide electoral college defeat in recent memory. She is still fighting to win the popular vote, though I predict she'll lose even that. Donald Trump is carrying all before him, as I've been predicting here for many months, nearly a year, in fact. The state of Michigan is unwinnable by Kamala Harris, as it was for Joe Biden, because of the hundreds of thousands of Arab Americans, mainly Lebanese Americans, who live in the state. When you're slaughtering their family members in the towns and cities of the Lebanon, you can hardly, with any confidence, ask them for their vote. And no Democrat has ever won the presidency whilst losing Michigan. I predict that she's going to lose Pennsylvania by a landslide. I think that Trump is in play even in New York. The liberals are cracking up, as anyone who saw the young liberal woman screaming obscenities in the face of a child in a pram who was wearing a Gaza badge on her little cardigan. "I don't give an F about Gaza, you bitch," she screamed at a small child before a black woman intervened and pushed her away. The liberals are cracking up. The last time they went mad in their pussy hats in 2016 when Donald Trump won. Will it get even uglier this time? If Trump is back for 4 more years, what will the attitude be of the legions of liberal commentators whose career is about to take a severe nosedive? Georgia, George Soros spent hundreds of millions of dollars to subvert the Asian state of Georgia, which the European Union wishes to purloin. Georgia isn't even in Europe, never mind the European Union. And the people look to Russia rather than to von der Leyen and Brussels. This was proved all over again in the elections to the parliament over this weekend. The biggest vote for one of the opposition groups was 11%. The governing party, called by Western media pro-Russian, but in truth just pro-Georgian, anti-European Union, got 54% of the vote. So there'll be no change in Georgia. That probably was the reason why George Soros and Boris Johnson were out, their faces twisted with hate today, calling on the people of Georgia to stage an insurrection. You know, the kind of insurrection which in 2014 started off the dismal state of affairs which has now led to all-out war in the Ukraine and the deaths of well over 1 million people. The burning of hundreds of billions of dollars in trash. It is an incredible sight to see Boris Johnson calling for an uprising in a foreign country thousands of miles away from him, especially as he denounced Donald Trump as an insurrectionist on January the 6th. Good luck getting back into America after the November 5 elections, Boris. The West will undoubtedly seek to destabilize Georgia further. So the Georgian government has asked for Russian assistance to implement the will of their electorate. Remember, 54% to 11%, 10%, 9% for the opposition factions. The Russian government will, I'm sure, be happy to oblige. Russia's near abroad has been exposed in the Ukraine as its underbelly, which will never be allowed to become soft again. All the talk was about this kind of thing amongst Russians when Gayatri and I left Kazan yesterday. The people have moved on from the BRICS with some relief. Kazan was brought to a standstill by 36 heads of state careering around in their cavalcades, roads blocked, police from all over the country, making sure that it was a flawless, absolutely flawless international Congress of 20,000 people, 2,000 journalists, including the CNN, NBC, Sky News, and BBC News. I myself had an interview with the latter too, a perfectly convivial one with Mr. Rosenberg, the BBC correspondent there. He's now gone off to Georgia, so you can tell the BBC has declared a national emergency. He'll be roaming around the streets of Tbilisi now, seeking to foment unrest, no doubt. But my altercation with the Sky News fellow, which Sky News never aired, that's how bad it was. They never aired an interview with me in Russia at the BRICS summit. But Gayatri's quick-wittedness captured it all on her video. And if you haven't seen it yet, well, millions already have. Sky didn't air it, but millions have seen it. I commend it to you. It's given rise to the slogan, Sky News being massacred by George Galloway since 2006. It's my triple whammy for Sky News, just in time before they go out of business sometime soon. But the situation in the Persian Gulf and in the Levant has not changed materially since I spoke to you last on Wednesday. Israel has now attacked Iran 3 times. Iran has attacked Israel twice. Any schoolboy knows that the mathematics of that require a third Iranian response. Only then, Sir Keir Starmer, will it be appropriate to call for no further escalation. You can't call on the person who's been attacked 3 times not to escalate in response to the third attack. The fact that it was a nearly risible failure, thanks to the air defenses of Iran, thanks to the cowardice of the Israeli pilots who would not enter Iranian airspace but fired their rockets from outside it, the Iranians lost 4 members of their anti-aircraft personnel, and some damage was reportedly done to some military-industrial complex factories. But that's not the point. Limited it may have turned out to be. Limited it was not intended to be. In any case, you can't put limits on the sovereignty of a country like Iran. The supreme leader of Iran and all the top brass have already said that Iran is going to respond for a 3rd time. At that point, Israel will have to make up its mind. whether it wants to continue tit for tat when tat is evidently much more powerful than their tit, will have to make a judgment as to whether to carry on doing this. In any case, we have no way of knowing what ordnance Iran will fire at Israel in its third response. It might be extra special, never seen before, like the never seen before anti-aircraft fire that Iran put up just the other night over their country. Israeli forces are saying that they had never encountered anti-aircraft fire of that precision and of that speed, Mach 6, the speed of the anti-aircraft missiles. If you want to know how fast that is, it's already past you. But the real story of Israel's continued mass murder in Gaza and in Lebanon is the tremendous toll which the resistance continues to take on the invading Israeli forces. Both of these invasions are illegal. It's not often said that. In fact, it's often implied that it's the other way around. Israel has no right whatsoever to invade Lebanon. Not self-defense, no other explanation at all. It's flatly illegal to be bombing an Arab capital day after day, night after night, killing civilians, collapsing huge residential apartment blocks, and claiming that you were aiming for one guy in the middle of that apartment block. Even if we could believe you, that would constitute a war crime of a very serious character. And all these journalists shilling for it, foreign journalists as well as Israeli journalists, should know that Streicher was hanged at Nuremberg for being the mouthpiece of war crimes. These British, American, and other foreign journalists who are constantly propagandizing for flatly illegal acts by the Israeli gang are themselves open to prosecution, at least in any sane world, which might or might not emerge anytime soon. But the Lebanese resistance is taking such a toll on the invading Israeli army that they have already declared they're going to pull out within a week. We'll be talking to Ghadi Francis in a minute or two about that. Some invasion. They haven't got 2 kilometers into the country and they've announced that they are leaving already, which is of a piece. They're good at murdering women and children in apartment blocks from the sky. Not so good at fighting man to man against people defending their own country in the Lebanese resistance. And so their withdrawal, if it happens, will be another huge victory for the Lebanese resistance. And though much ink will be expended by the Western media to cover for it, it will represent a new balance of power in the north of occupied Palestine, in the south of Lebanon. But it's not just the Lebanese resistance, the Iraqi resistance, the Yemeni resistance, even the now Saudi Arabian resistance have launched weaponry against the Netanyahu settler state. A Shiite group, I presume, in the east of Saudi Arabia have announced that they have joined the axis of resistance and have begun firing rockets at Israel. This is getting out of hand, you know, as any fool, anyone who genuinely thought themselves a friend of Israel would already have recognized. Israel cannot fight all of its neighbors, let alone all of them at the same time. And they definitely can't fight Iran, both because Iran is enormously powerful militarily, is cohesive socially, is massive population-wise, is rich and getting richer, but because its special relationship with Russia and China make it inviolable to a full-scale American attack. In any case, Iran could stop the oil trade just like that, could block the Straits of Hormuz. The Yemenis can block the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Then you won't be able to get petrol for $100 a gallon, if you could get it at all. Iran can destroy the oil and gas facilities of America's allies in the region if they were to in any way, passively or actively, assist the attack upon Iran. So Iran is an unbeatable foe. And this new balance of power has to be acknowledged and acted upon by Netanyahu or by the Western states that sponsor him and make him possible. Because unless they actively want the entire region to go up in a puff of potentially nuclear smoke, they better cage this mad dog Netanyahu that they have allowed to run riot for more than a year with horrific consequences. To which I turn. A Palestinian truck driver today plowed his truck into more than 50 Israelis, mainly military personnel, many of them intelligence officers, near the infamous 8200 battalion, which is the Israeli intelligence battalion. It was an unedifying spectacle. It was an horrific death, no doubt. The truck driver was, of course, shot dead, as he knew that he would be. But it just goes to show that the spirit of resistance amongst the Palestinian people has not been broken. The prospect of their death does not stop them. Indeed, because they believe they're going immediately to heaven if they die fighting Israel, the incentive to go out all guns blazing or all engines revving is very considerable indeed. The Palestinian resistance, from the hovels, from the ruins and the rubble of what's left of the Gaza Strip, continue to take an incredibly high toll on the Israeli forces that have invaded them. The struggle against the resistance in Gaza has not ended. The struggle against the resistance in Lebanon can never be won. It's about time Western politicians understood that. Stay tuned. It's the mother of all talk shows. Well, first of all, Bob Geldof and his good friend Bono are on the other side. It wasn't for South Africa, it was for the Horn of Africa. I was involved in it at the time. That was my job at the time. And there were many differences. First of all, it was easy because of Cold War politics to take a stand on the famine in sub-Saharan Africa in 1984-85. I did so myself, but it was easy to do. There was no Ethiopian lobby smearing you as an anti-Ethiopian racist if you got involved in it. There was absolutely gale force wind of free publicity from the newspapers and the television about the famine in Africa at that time. There is zero publicity in the mainstream media about the calvary being undergone by the Palestinian people in 2024. Thirdly, the artists involved lost nothing and arguably gained much by being involved in that charitable enterprise. Artists today lining up for Palestine, like the great Eric Clapton, like the great Roger Waters, and I'm running out of names already, would not only not be benefiting from putting on a Live Aid for Palestine, their careers would be destroyed, would be brought to a shuddering halt if they did. So I'm afraid none of the conditions which made possible the Live Aid phenomenon exist over Palestine. Indeed, quite the contrary.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
"14 bullets were fired at the former Bolivian President Evo Morales today and wounded his chauffeur. He narrowly escaped death and has blamed it on his own erstwhile party comrade, President Arce. The ruling MAS party is completely divided from top to bottom, and disturbingly, it looks as if it might be along ethnic lines. One thing is for sure, those who wish to plunder Bolivia's riches must be very happy indeed. Be interested in calls on that subject. Is America headed for civil war? That's the question in the poll this evening. 33,865 of you have already voted, and the results are very interesting indeed. So you can vote on my Telegram channel, t.me/George Galloway, on my X, my Twitter, on the YouTube community stream, the YouTube community poll, or on the YouTube stream. If you're watching on the YouTube stream, please subscribe to my channel. We are just a kick in the ass away from 500,000 subscribers on that channel. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do to my YouTube channel. And if you're watching on YouTube, please share with all of your contacts there. If you want to call the show, it's toll-free in the United States and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. It's free of charge in the United States, in the United Kingdom and Ireland, 08081 965522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Now, everybody's favorite guest on the mother of all talk shows joins us again tonight. She's a Lebanese woman of great courage and fortitude and eloquence and grace. She is Ghadi Francis, and we welcome her back to the mother of all talk shows. Ghadi, it's a painful time for your country, for your people. On the other hand, the resistance from amongst your people is not just complete, but seems to be, to a remarkable extent, cross-communal, cross-community, cross-ethnicity. It seems that Lebanon has come together almost like never before to repel the invader, which has crossed your border but hasn't made much progress. Is that how you see it?
Hello, George. You're so kind. Thank you for having me again. And thank you for all you do and your stances and your global voice on behalf of my people and the Palestinians for all these years. We appreciate you and all your work.
Thank you.
I want to start by telling you, really, honestly, I haven't been prouder to be Lebanese in my life. I'm so proud that I'm Lebanese in this moment. I'm so proud of the ethics. I'm so proud of the capabilities. I'm so proud of the resilience, of the persistence, of the spirit of our people. Everybody could see the footages coming out. Israel targets our hospitals, our kids, bombs with CPU, bunker busters with white phosphorus. It even actually caused an earthquake yesterday in South Lebanon. This is what Israel does to invade my country. And my countrymen, we target military bases, we target Merkava tanks, We target the planes and the drones that kill our babies. And if and when they want to target or to retaliate, they give warnings, and they do always deliver in a way where they never breach an international law or a human law or a sky law or like any kind of religious law in humanity. As my people are being slaughtered in thousands, and even throughout decades, in tens of thousands, and my land is being bombed, and our civilian uh, buildings are being flattened. With all that has been done to our country, we remain ethical, we remain loyal to what life means to humanity, to land, to human beings, regardless of the fact that these human beings were brought from all around the world to squat in our land. I haven't been prouder. For 3 weeks, George, for 3 weeks, they've been trying with everything to enter Lebanon. And for 3 weeks, they weren't able to take anything from Lebanon. They were able to kill civilians and kids. They were able to assassinate people who were in Beirut in meeting rooms. But did they deter Hezbollah actually on the ground? Did they stop these southern villagers from protecting their land in South Lebanon? No. You can see them, they like resurrect. You could see the Israelis, they flatten a mountain, they flatten a village, they bomb the whole entire village, and then they put their arms on the side and they rest and they parade and they take videos inside our homes, wearing our women's clothes, making fun of our memories and our lives. And then a few hours later in the night, Hezbollah fighters resurrect from under the rubble and attack them and deter them and send them back to northern occupied Palestine. I haven't been prouder. I'm so proud of us. And I know you started, it is a very tough time for my people. We are seeing death and destruction everywhere. But it is only through that very dark tunnel that we are able to reach the light of liberty and the light of justice for the native, indigenous, righteous people of this land.
Ghadi, very moving and powerful indeed. Tell me this, is it true that Israel say they're only 1 week away from completing their ground mission in Lebanon and that they are preparing to withdraw? How humiliating a withdrawal would that be?
I wanna ask you a question, my turn, George. Is anything the Israelis say true? Have they said anything that was true? They're all about propaganda. You know, they even said,
Yeah.
I mean, this whole war was started on a lie that was debunked one time, many times, on a lie of mass rape and beheaded babies, on a lie. We all know now about the Hannibal Directive, about October 7, how the Nova Festival was attacked by their planes, how many of the cars was attacked by their planes. Many of the Israeli survivors from October 7 said that, and yet you could still hear that propaganda perturbated all around the world, because this is what they do. They lie, and they have this multi-billion-dollar machine of mainstream media all around the Western media, aligned with the US foreign policy and colonization that repeats the lies. And so whatever they say about their missions, that would always be a lie to me, because they're going to try to picture it as an ended mission. I want to ask you, what was their target from the beginning? Their target was to, as they say, to return the settlers to northern occupied Palestine. And the end game, they became more. Haifa and even Tel Aviv and more places were attacked by the rockets. So they weren't able to reach their target by returning or by like finishing that. And they also said they want to destroy Hezbollah. They assassinated the leader, the 60-something-year-old leader that was in his office in a meeting. But these 100,000 fighters that are called Hezbollah just became angrier. They just became more persistent. And for them, ideologically, it became an existential war. They even turned them more dangerous and the vengeance is screaming up high, and we can see it in the south. I mean, we are talking about this in the history of all the movements, of all the resistance movements that have emerged in this region. And I'm talking about secular, communist, Palestinian, Arabists, all kinds of resistance movements in the history since they occupied Palestine. This is the first time that any resistance movement does around 50 operations in one day, including drone attacks, rockets, tank burning, all kinds of military capacity is showed. So how did they actually destroy Hezbollah? We can't see it. We can only see them accumulating more and more and adding more numbers. And it is really in an accelerating and ascending order, if you could see that. This is from one side. And from another side, it is the first time in the history of these resistance groups that someone actually attempts or says they will attempt to assassinate an Israeli prime minister. And I'm talking about the attack on Benyamina and Qisaraya. These are all areas around Tel Aviv. These are all areas where Hezbollah drones were able to get there without the sirens, without being tracked, and to hit their target. They did not kill Netanyahu, but they sent him a message, and I'm sure that he's now himself a displaced settler. So he wanted to return these displaced settlers to northern Palestine, and he became displaced.
He's just asked President Biden for $700,000 to make his home safe from resistance attack. That's just breaking in the last half hour. The American taxpayers' patience is never ending. Tell me, I said earlier in my introduction that Lebanon was, and I've known Lebanon, as you know, since long before you were born. I've never known Lebanon to be as united as they are around this struggle. Have I got that right?
Well, I wish. I want to be honest with you. It's good to boost the morale and speak and repeat things we want to hear. But actually on the ground, no, the Zionists have always worked on a part of the internal and the local society in Lebanon. They actually had some ties with Lebanese figures even before they occupied Palestine. And here I'm quoting the papers of Eliyahu Sasson and the papers of the Zionists inventors in our region. So the people who started this occupation in Palestine, they always had ties with certain groups inside Lebanon as allies, because they supposedly would help them against the other sects in Lebanon. They were the reason why we had civil war, and I'm sure you know how they were distributing this propaganda sometimes, and sometimes weapons, and sometimes building up, and even aiding military-wise some groups to kill other groups. So this is also being used. I am afraid, George, that they are trying, the Americans directly. I don't want to only speak about Israel at that point. I mean, these are American planes. These are American ammunition. This is American impunity. Even when the Americans say it's not us, they're protecting it. And now, according to what you just said, they're even going to build him a 700,000 bunker to continue killing us. So it's an American war here. The Americans in Lebanon are trying to establish something that is similar to what was in the 80s, as in to divide the community, to make it even more polarized, to start up problems and fires domestically. And we have people inside Lebanon that are always susceptible for that. But fortunately enough, because of the lessons of the 80s, because when they tried in the 80s, they failed. And when they tried to corner the resistance groups in the 80s, I'm sure you know, they turned them into beasts. They brought their Marines, and the Marines got bombed in Beirut. There were assassinations in Beirut. These groups do not stop when you oppress them. They become even angrier, and it becomes more existential for them. So because we have this lesson about the 80s, about these divisions, I think we have some wise people, even on the other side, that are anti-resistance, and inside the Lebanese army, we have some wise people who are telling them that if you repeat the 80s, you will reap what you did last time. You didn't really succeed. I mean, they even brought Amin Jumayel. He was a president. He was pro-Israel. He wanted to sign a treaty with Israel, and that did not work. They had with them the army and the presidency and all the government in Lebanon, and still the resistance won. So they are trying, the Zionists and the Americans and their proxies, and also with the aid of some Arabs, some Gulf nations, they are trying and working and funding people and figures who have erupted from nowhere into journalism or politics to spread that vibe in Lebanon. They are trying and constantly. And hopefully they will always fail, but they are trying.
And finally, how do people view the role of France? Macron blows hot and cold, of course, but when he's blowing hot, he's really quite severe about Netanyahu. And he seems to have shelled out a fair bit of money today, a total of, I think, €1 billion. Euros from France to help the people of Lebanon. Is this sincere, do you think?
Well, there is a certain tie always between the French and the Lebanese. I mean, some Lebanese are actually proud to call themselves a Francophone country. And Macron himself is a smart politician. He's trying to build his presence in that. And I think regardless of the alignment, regardless of the stances we are seeing from Europe, and most of the time even complicity, whether it's in aiding or funding or giving ammunitions or planes or weapons or even voting against, trying them. But I think the French are still very different from the stances of America, because they still have they're not hegemony like in their approach to Lebanon. They always try to seem like a mother who wants to help. And I don't think any state that respects itself can continue aiding and funding and protecting a genocide. So what the French or what the French president is doing now, he's trying to take one little step towards the right side of history after all that complicity. So yes, thank you, France, but it's a little bit late, and welcome back to humanity.
Yes, better late than never. Ghadi Francis, as always, spellbinding. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. We've got a Colonel Richard in Texas coming up. That sounds interesting. Stay tuned. I'll be right back. Donald is in Inverness on Assange. Go ahead, Donald.
Hi, George. Good to hear from you again. I'm phoning about Assange, but really your audience is highly privileged to benefit from your international research. I mean, tonight you told us about the misfired missile and the helicopter crash. We'll never hear that on mainstream news. Last time, Gonzalo Lira told us about Poland doubling its armed forces. These are very important pieces of information. Now, information is one thing, but what I want to do, George, is I want to raise the topic of conscience. But I want to illustrate it with an incident that I saw in a documentary in World War II. A U.S. soldier called Glenn Fraser had a Japanese officer's sword at his head, ready to chop it off to make him an example to others. And he was told that he would die for having his hands in his pockets in the cold weather. And did he have any last words to say? So this Fraser looked the fellow, this is the Japanese officer, looked him in the eye, and he told the Japanese officer that he could kill him. But he says, you cannot kill my spirit. He says, and my spirit will lodge in your body and haunt you until the day you die.
Very powerful, Donald. I too, like you, believe in the judgment day. I believe in the afterlife. I believe that we will reap what we sow. And I agree entirely with the point you make about conscience. I put it this way, that my conscience is my daily communion with God. And if I follow my conscience, I won't do wrong. And if we all reawaken our conscience, as you beautifully put it, then we will have no need for policing. We'll certainly have less need for policing. And heaven knows we could do with that. You know that they speak the best English in the world in Inverness, and Donald is a good example of it.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Is America headed for civil war? A big poll and rather depressing results so far. 70% say yes, 63% yes, 69% yes, 64% yes. My goodness, the pussy hats must be dusting down their carbines if America is going to head for civil war with Donald Trump poised to win a landslide victory. On line one from Toronto in Canada is Paul. He's up next. On you go, Paul.
Well, thank you, George, for taking the phone call. Just a couple of comments. One,
welcome.
Congratulations on owning that chap at the BRICS Summit, that Sky reporter. Honestly, George, I got to say, you made my week. And I know your wife was very swift on the on her phone camera.
She was.
And the whole world.
Thankful.
Give her a big hug for me for that one.
Exactly.
That was fantastic, because I'm sure that Sky never would have published that interview, but it was brilliant. It went viral. And so I want to say, George, you really did make my week. One more comment. I was observing through Telegram what was going on Friday night, and I was absolutely flabbergasted at the response of the anti-air defense systems of the Iranians. Now, I'm a Protestant Christian. I know you're a Catholic Christian. But once I saw the first missiles fly, I went to my knees and I spoke to the Almighty and I interceded and I asked him to protect the people of Tehran and of Iran. And no sooner had I get off my knees than I'm watching what was going on. And I was flabbergasted at how they managed to knock so many of those missiles out of the sky. And thank God for that, because I know that it was tragic and there was 4 people killed, but it could have been a whole lot worse. And so I'm a man who believes in prayer.
Have you any idea, Paul, I don't know if you know about these things, but have you any idea what missiles the Iranians were using? Was it from the Russian supplied S-400 or what?
Well, that would be my suspicion, George, but I imagine to this day that there are people in Tel Aviv and people in Washington still scratching their heads as to what the Iranians have up their sleeves. But all I can say was that we thank God they have
maybe
it.
we better,
but I have
maybe we better not say.
I have a real political for you, and that is the response to that is inevitable. And I do believe with all my heart that Iran will respond, because they are trying to set deterrence. And as you said earlier, the score at the moment is 3-2. And I don't believe Iran will quit until it's 3-3 or whatever that happens to go on toward. But my question for you is this, George. Do you believe that the Iranians will retaliate before the U.S. election or after? Please answer that, and I look forward to hearing your answer on the TV. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Paul. A most erudite call. I would have thought they'll respond before the U.S. elections. Still 10 days, isn't it, to the American elections? I see only one circumstance in which Iran will not respond with all guns blazing. And that's if that was tied somehow to a deal over Lebanon. It's unlikely that they can tie it to a deal over Gaza. We're not at that stage yet. But if my auntie had a beard, she'd be my uncle. But bear with me. If Israel withdrew from Lebanon, stopped the bombing, that might influence the Iranian response. Short of that, I'm expecting a very big Iranian response and before the 5th of November. Asif is in England, in Eastham, and he's got an interesting point to make too. Asif, welcome.
Yes, hello, George, and nice to be on again with you. I just saw this really disturbing news, which my friend passed on to me. I printed off the article. I'm going to read it to you rather than telling you about it. Okay, it says U.S. authorizes CIA mercenaries to run biometric concentration camps in Gaza Strip. A private intelligence corporation billed as Uber for war zones is preparing to create what Israel hopes to be the model for supplanting Hamas rule in Gaza. The Biden administration has approved the deployment of 1,000 CIA-trained private mercenaries as part of a joint U.S.-Israeli plan to turn Gaza's apocalyptic rubblescape into a high-tech dystopia, starting with Al-Arian, a village in the north and western Gaza Strip. The plan calls to build what the Israeli Daily Ynet calls humanitarian bubbles, turning the remains of villages and neighborhoods into tiny concentration camps cut off from the environment.
Let me stop you, Asif, just because of the hour. I think people know the story you're referring to, but they perhaps don't know the statement made by a British official who described these bubbles as gated communities, a bit like the gated communities in Auschwitz, in Birkenau, in Belsen, that kind of gated community, where the Palestinians are gated, all right, in a concentration camp, and where they are given enough food to stay alive as long as they remain inside the gated community. George Orwell, you should be alive at this time. The problem with the proposal, Asif, as with so much else, it will never happen. It will never work. That would require the Palestinian resistance to no longer exist. And the Palestinian resistance very definitely continues to exist. So their humanitarian bubbles are likely to be burst quite violently. Now, we are still doing tremendously well with the podcast. We are #1 in Nigeria this week, and we're just outside still the top 10 in Russia this past few days. We're #9 in Pakistan for politics and in the top 40 for news, which is huge for us. We're also the #1 English political podcast in Lebanon on Apple. We're a permanent fixture in their top 10. So you can get us up to 500,000 by Christmas by scanning the QR code in the corner of your screen now. Let me go to Colonel Richard in Texas on a possible Iranian response. Colonel, welcome to the show.
Hello, George. Thank you for taking my call, and I really enjoy listening to you. I am a retired Marine artillery officer, and in that capacity, I did a lot of targeting. And, in Iran's last strike, they hit the big air base where most of the F-35s are based. They should keep hitting that base and all the other air bases because it's the Israeli Air Force that is the largest threat. And they should be hitting those air bases. Hezbollah should be hitting those air bases daily, crater the runways. And then when the repair crews come out, attack them again to keep those aircraft from being able to take off. If I were targeting...
That's fascinating advice, and coming from you, all the more potent. Why do you think they haven't done that? Is the air defense around that base such that only ballistic missiles, only hypersonic ballistic missiles can get through? Is that maybe the reason?
I really don't know, except I think so far Hezbollah has just been using the Katyusha rockets, which may not have the range. But I believe that they can exhaust the Israeli air defense system at least for an hour, because once they fire them, they have to reload the tubes. And while they're reloading, they can keep bombarding them.
Colonel, let me take advantage of your evident expertise, if I may. Have you a theory on what the Iranians were using in their air defense the other night? Because it looked spectacularly effective, almost like a video game. As each Israeli missile came in, bang, it was gone in an instant. And in the Israeli press, there were several references to an unknown quantity being present in the Iranian air defense. Any theories on what that might be?
George, I retired in the 90s. I've been out of it for a long time, and I have really no idea what equipment the Iranians may have, but it must be much more sophisticated than the U.S. and the Israelis thought they had, because that attack was almost completely shut down. But I agree with you. It's 3-2, and Iran owes number 3 back, and this next attack should be triple what the last one was, and they should devastate that airbase, take out the barracks, take out the control tower, but more than anything, crater the runway so the planes can't take off, and then keep hitting it every day so they can't repair it.
Colonel, I retired from the Royal Artillery Battery 2 Army Cadet Force in the 1960s, so I'm even further behind the times than you. Thank you indeed for a most interesting call. Colonel Richard in Texas. Is America headed for civil war, yes or no? Get voting comments. Sparky says, keep in mind Israel has killed many more Americans than Iran has. Remember the USS Liberty. And Claire Gillies says Jordan airspace was open for Israel. Absolute traitors. There does seem a lack of clarity on that point. Israeli jets definitely crossed Jordanian airspace. No doubt about that. And that's treacherous enough. But it would appear that none of the planes that flew over Jordan were used in the actual attack on Iran. A small difference perhaps, but one worth pointing out. Zaid is in Watford on Israeli expansion. Zaid, welcome.
Good evening, George. Salam, shalom, and peace to you and to everyone listening. My question is, I've got a couple of questions to all the Zionists that might be listening now, that maybe one could answer. Israel only has a population of 7 million Jews. So how do they plan to populate the land of Greater Israel stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates with just a population of 7 million Jews, considering Cairo alone has 20 million Arabs? And the other question is, if and when Israel does annex Gaza and the West Bank, they will have a population of 5 million Palestinians, 2 million in Gaza and 3 million in the West Bank, which they don't know what to do with. Now, if they give them Israeli citizenship, then along with the 2 million existing Arab Israelis inside Israel, that would make the Arab population now 50% of Israel, and Israel will no longer cease to be a majority Jewish state. So that means that's the only way that I can see them getting, planning to do is to expel all the Palestinians in Gaza to Egypt and the ones in West Bank to Jordan, which both Jordan and Egypt have said will be a breach of the peace deal they have with Israel and an act of war. What do you think?
Yeah. Well, what I think, first of all, is you've just shown the quality of the audience, the quality of this global university of the airwaves. A double question there that could have me talking all night, and I don't have all night, so the quick version is this. I have always laughed at the idea of the Greater Israel Project. They can't control 2 camels in Tulkarm. So how are they going to control everywhere from Cairo to Baghdad? And according to Smotrich, including Beirut. And according to Smotrich, also, Istanbul will be a part of the kingdom of the Jews. So there's Istanbul, Cairo, Beirut, and everywhere between Cairo and Baghdad, with 7 million people. Plainly, that is utterly ridiculous, and I've always laughed at it. But I'm not laughing now, because bit by bit, and using the old British ploy of divide and rule, it is possible to see how they could rule through a combination of sectarianization, religio-ethnic balkanization, so Lebanon broken into a Christian entity, a Druze entity, Sunni entity, Shia entity, and so on. In theory, that could happen. In theory, you could divide the Jordanians between Palestinians and Iraqis, the 2 biggest components of the population, and the original Bedouin Jordanian population. Ditto in Saudi Arabia, between the East and the West. Ditto in Iraq, between the Zaydis, the Christians, the Sunnis, the Shiites. You could, in theory, like the British did, create a vast empire without yourself having to place millions of your own people, millions that you don't have in Israel's case, in situ. But I still think it's a pipe dream. But it is a pipe dream deeply believed by people right at the top of the current Israeli government. On the, what was the second part of that question now? Zaid, if you're still on the line, give me the second part of the question again.
Sorry, the second part of the question was, if and when Israel annexes both Gaza and the West Bank, what will they do with the 5 million Palestinians that they have in Gaza and West Bank? Will they give them citizenship?
Yeah.
Or
well, no, they can't give them citizenship. That's the only reason why they haven't annexed these territories, because then they will have to officially declare an apartheid state. They'll have to say, we've annexed this territory, but the people in it will not have the rights that the Israeli Jewish citizens of the state have. So that's the only reason why they haven't annexed these territories. Everyone knows they are, in practice, an apartheid state, but they have never officially acceded to the inescapable truth that they are. But they would have to if they annexed East Jerusalem, the West Bank. Well, they already have annexed East Jerusalem, but nobody recognizes it except Donald Trump. And they would not be able to give them nationality because, as you rightly say, 5 million Palestinians from the West Bank and Gaza and 2 million Palestinian citizens of Israel from 1948 equals 50-50, and it would no longer be the Zionist ethno-religious state of Israel at that point. But the other option of mass transfer, as they call it, mass deportation, as they call it, to Egypt and to Jordan, is equally difficult to see, although I probably oughtn't to say that, because we've already seen things that we never thought it would be possible that the world would allow. But definitely it would be the end of the Jordanian regime, and definitely it would be the end of the Egyptian regime. So it's not a zero cost option, that one. And of course, how do you actually get 5 million people onto the cattle trucks to drive them out of the country? Do you have even enough soldiers to achieve that? And how are you going to handle the resistance to it? How are you going to handle the resistance to it alongside a war with Egypt and with Jordan, such as it would be? Look, one more call before the break. Sharia is in Dubai on Palestine and Ukraine. Sharia, welcome.
Yes, sir. Good evening, Mr. George.
Good evening, sir.
Yeah, sir, first of all, thank you so much. You support the Palestinian and Lebanon people, sir. Sir, my first question is how can border be drawn to create a viable and mutually recognized two-state solution? Or is any other framework more realistic, sir?
Well, where's this two-state solution going to go? The area that was intended in the Oslo Agreement for a two-state solution is now paved with Israeli settlements, 800,000 settlers in a series of Beverly Hills type property developments on top of hills with swimming pools and fountains and all the rest. You seriously going to say that the Israelis will knock all these things down or will forcibly move all these settlers out of there? It's a pipe dream, and I speak as someone who supported it, who supported the Oslo Agreement. More fool me. The reality is that the Israelis have no intention of allowing a two-state solution. Their game has been since Oslo just to keep the peace process processing for as long as possible. Sharia, thanks for that call. Look, after the break, we've got Professor Sami Al-Arian, founder and director of the Center for Islam and Global Affairs, and a professor of public affairs at Istanbul Zaim University. Well worth hearing. Stay tuned. I defy anyone to contradict the point that I just made, that every person alive today was born of woman. So why would we say that the people in the labor wards, in the maternity units, are people who are giving birth? Why can't we say women? Why can't we say mothers? Why can't we say women who are breastfeeding, mothers who are breastfeeding? Why do we need to say people who are chest feeding? All of these words, and indeed all of the trend that you say you dissociate yourself from, of transgenderism, transmania, I call it, are all taking rights away from women.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Is America heading for civil war? Vote on my Telegram, on my Twitter, on the YouTube community poll, and on the YouTube stream. Is America headed for civil war? Yes or no? And the phone numbers again, it's toll free in the US and Canada, +1 844 944 3344. And it's free of charge in the UK and Ireland, 0808 196 5522. And the worldwide number is 0044 203 966 2625. Professor Sami Al-Arian, founder and director of SIGA, professor of public affairs at the Istanbul Zaim University, joins us now. Professor, thank you for joining us. You are, of course, now in Turkey, but your grandparents were amongst the victims of the catastrophe itself, the Nakba, who spilled, like almost 1 million others, into an exile which has lasted all this time. And therefore, I'm correct, I'm sure, in assuming that you are following events on the ground there with the utmost closeness. So tell us what you think of Israel's end game in this. I've just been discussing with a caller. What is it that they have in mind? Do they intend to try and transfer 5 million people out? Do they intend to try and illegally annex these territories, in which case, how will they answer the obvious apartheid point, which is inevitably will rise? Or will it be more of the same for as long as they can get away with it?
Chris, thank you very much for inviting me. Actually, both of my parents were born in Jaffa, Palestine, and both were exiled. Both were kicked out of Jaffa. And therefore, I am a son of refugees of the 1948. As far as the question you posed is concerned, I think it's very important to remind ourselves that Israel is a settler, colonial, terrorist state that was established, as you all know, on the backs of the Palestinians. We had the first Nakba, but throughout the years, the numbers of Palestinians, even though 80% of the Palestinians in the occupied territories of the 1948 were exiled, eventually in 1967, Israel was in control of the whole land, and now they have the whole Palestinians, half of the Palestinians actually inside Palestine. And today, that number, as you pointed out, is probably exceeds the number of Jews. So they had a problem on their hand. They're trying to take advantage of the resistance, because the Palestinians on October the 7th, it was an act of resistance. It was a prison break. That's what it was. And there were reasons for what happened on October 7th. We witnessed the biggest siege in the history, probably in this region and probably beyond. For the past 17 years, Gaza was under crippling siege. We saw that the new government, which came into power at the end of 2022, they were intent on not only taking over 60% of the West Bank and trying to expel the Palestinians and annexate the lands, but also they were trying to take over the Al-Aqsa compound. We saw the Ben Gvir policies towards the prisoners. So when you put all these 5 reasons together, Gaza, West Bank, Jerusalem, the prisoners, and the strategic point, which Netanyahu was trying to argue 2 weeks prior, that this whole region is actually going to become under Israel's hegemony, when he drew the map that's extended from India through the ocean and the Gulf and Saudi Arabia and the Emirates and Jordan and Haifa and back to Europe. And basically he was saying that we are in charge of this now. There is no longer something called Palestine. That's why we saw October 7th. But when you put all this all together, Israel found that there is a solution out of its quandary. They had a problem because they didn't want to have a 2-state solution. That train has left the station. It's now with Sami coming back. They don't have certainly one man, one vote, where Palestinians will have the same civil and political rights. So, and they don't want to be an apartheid state, because that's what they are. So they found a way to deal with this by committing genocide, by forcing the Palestinians to leave. And of course, that plan was given by Smotrich, who is part and parcel of the current government. He is the finance minister. He's in charge of the settlement policies inside the West Bank. And he said, basically, Palestinians have 3 choices. One, they need to be subjects of Israel. They need to recognize that Israel is a Jewish state and that they will never get any kind of rights. And they stay there at the discretion of the government. If they don't like it, then they could simply take some compensation and leave. And if they don't like it, then they would be considered as terrorists and they could be executed. These are the choices that Palestinians were given. The whole world turned their back on the Palestinians. And therefore, Israel thought that with the support of America, because America not only has been complicit in this genocide, they've been partners to Israel, is that they can actually commit another Nakba. They could actually force at least 1 million from Gaza. They've been trying for over a year and they have failed miserably. And now, of course, they want to establish a hegemony over the Middle East by thinking because they were able to get tactical advantages or tactical achievements in Lebanon that they could simply pacify Hezbollah. And now they're finding the hard way that this is impossible, that they cannot do that. And therefore, what Israel is trying to do is, again, trying to take advantage of what happened October 7th, take advantage of the weakness of the world's response, take advantage of America's complicity in this, trying to impose new realities on the ground. And so far, they have failed, and I believe that they will fail. They try also to take advantage of what happened across Iran. They are trying to end the nuclear program in Iran. But I think they also found the hard way that this is impossible without America's support. And America is very reluctant to lend its support, particularly in an election season. But more importantly, strategically, they couldn't even get Iraq. They couldn't get even Afghanistan right. If they're going to fight Iran, it's going to be even more devastating for their strategic situation across the world. Add to that this international system that the U.S. has built since World War II is crumbling because of Zionism, it's crumbling because of Israel behavior, and it's crumbling because of America's blind support to Israel. This whole thing is going to have a very important and great geostrategic implications, not only for the region, but also across the world.
There is I mean, how seriously do you take this Greater Israel talk? I mentioned before you came on, Smotrich recently threatened that Istanbul would be under the kingdom of the Jews. Maybe you should step outside and tell your fellow Istanbulians about that. But the idea that they could control an area that vast with 7 million Israeli Jews is, on the face of it, completely fanciful. Is it just macho talk on their part?
It's a pipe dream. I mean, these people are half crazies, if not fully crazies. When you listen to their talk, to their rhetoric, you don't think you're talking to or listening to rational human beings. And of course, this idea of having Greater Israel between the Nile and the Euphrates, this has been an old idea, and they know that they can't simply control this whole area physically. But I think what they've been trying to do is to try by proxy control the whole region, and they have been successful. Just listen or read the latest book by Bob Woodward called War. Just came out last week, particularly chapter 46, in which he talks about the trips that Blinken did right after October 7th, in which he met some of the Arab leaders, the autocrats in the region, and what their response to what happened then. And you would know that these regimes are pretty much controlled by Israel, by the Zionist regime. And therefore, they think that this could go on forever, that somehow they could be in control of the region because they're able to control few regimes here and there who are acting like American client states. But the fact of the matter is that the region cannot be controlled forever like this. And I think we've seen some examples of what happens when people start breaking out of their prison and determining to resist. And that resistance basically has been the answer, and it's widening. Now we can see it not only in Palestine and Lebanon, we can see it in Yemen, in Iraq, and Syria, in Iran, and I think in other places. It's not going to continue like this. And when you look at they're trying to impose and try to get us a sense of defeat. Defeat is a state of mind, and as long as people resist and they do not believe they are defeated, then there is no defeat here. And I think what we are going to see pretty soon is that despite all the carnage, despite all the killings and destruction of life, civilian life in Gaza, a small enclave has not been able to be pacified, and they want to control the entire Middle East by physically having it. They couldn't even control Gaza. They couldn't even today, after a year of absolute devastation. And I believe the death toll is much more than 52,000. I think we're approaching possibly 200,000 between killed and injured. And they haven't been able to even declare total victory in Gaza, and they are trying to somehow control Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and part of Saudi Arabia and Istanbul. That's just crazy, to say the least.
Fantastic tour of the horizon there, Professor. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. I do hope you'll join us again. A very eloquent guest, I think you'll agree. Comments. Kylo 1KO says, Georgians are wise. They see what the West has done to Ukraine. I have never been as happy to see as many flags of St. George waved in triumph than the ones being waved in Georgia over the last couple of days. If you're Scottish, you'll know what I mean. Syed Mehdi says, hi from Iran. We use our own defense system called Bavar 373, made in Iran. And Ramplens01 says, Netflix removed all 32 Palestinian movies from its platform. Hashtag boycott Netflix. I don't know what these companies think they're doing. Continually bringing hatred down upon themselves to please a tiny number of zealots. I simply don't understand how all these businesses have wrecked their model, wrecked their reputation forevermore in the global south, in the global east, all to defend Israel? Seriously? Let me take a quick break and I'll be back with the legend that is Simon of Weaponized News, starting with the Georgia elections. You don't want to miss it. Stay tuned.
A new dawn has broken, has it not?
He had that Clinton thing. His eyes were round and big and smiley, and he was very charming.
He became this incredible pop idol kind of prime minister.
I think most people who have dealt with me think I'm a pretty straight sort of guy, and I am.
New Labour was backed by the most powerful media interests because they realised he was representing them.
He was caught red-handed trading policy in return for hard cash from a businessman.
America has no truer friend than Great Britain.
Both Bush as well as Tony Blair are now wanting to plunge the world into a holocaust.
JP Morgan paid him off for the Iraq war. The man is a war criminal.
Is Tony Blair a war criminal? In my opinion, yes.
Most definitely. The pursuit of money has become the dominant theme in your life.
All these relationships are, in most people's estimation, corrupt relationships.
No previous Labour Prime Minister has behaved in this shameful, money-grubbing way.
How do you sleep at night? You know, it's that. It's as a person.
Now you get that film and the killings of Tony Blair and the Killing Kelly film, two of the films that Gayatri and I have made. You get them free gratis, along with other content that no one else gets, if you support us on patreon.com/George Galloway. That's the way to support this mother of all talk shows show. Once upon a time we had one show a week. Now you're all used to 2 shows a week. But the 2 shows a week is dependent on the money that we raise from you, the audience. And the fastest way to get us that money, to keep this midweek show going, is through Patreon, patreon.com/George Galloway. Let's hear from the legend. There is Simon, formerly of Florida, now of Weaponized News. Please Tell us about the Georgia election, Simon. Have I lost him? Well, let me, the poll, is America headed for civil war? Yes, say 70%, 63, 69, 64, 29,000 people think that. That's quite a serious thing. Now, we've got Tommy in Ireland coming up shortly, but we are waiting for Simon of Weaponized News. But Mark with a K says, when you're born, you get a ticket to the freak show. When you're born in the US, you get a front row seat, says George Carlin. Elizabeth K9 says, thank you for being here, Mr. Galloway. That's it. Just thank you. Thank you, Elizabeth. I'm here physically. My head is somewhere else. I've been doing some hard traveling, as you probably know. Mark Tiller says, Lula blocking BRICS membership to Venezuela and Nicaragua is a congenital deformity of BRICS that has to be corrected. Lula is acting as a Yankee puppet. And Paul Meany says, gee, excellent video over the sky. So-called journalist went viral, exposing his Russophobia, his anti-Palestinian bias and his bias against the Lebanese genocide victims. Why in the name of God does the Supreme Commander-in-Chief world leader, President Putin, allow British Russophobia journalists into Russia when Russia journalists are banned in the so-called democratic Britain? That was to be my opening line if I had caught President Putin's eye at the press conference. I was going to say before my question, I was going to say, isn't it ironic that the BBC are allowed a front row seat 5 meters from President Putin to bristle with hostility against the Russian government, whilst no Russian journalist or broadcaster is allowed even to work in Britain, never mind to walk around Whitehall getting up close and personal with Sir Keir Starmer and able to evince extreme prejudice against them. Simon's here now. Weaponized News. The floor is yours. Simon, what's happening?
Greetings to you, Mr. Galloway, and to your worldwide audience. So we've got quite a lot of drama going on around the world today. Not only do we have this remarkable situation in Georgia, where it appears the ruling party have been returned to power, the country's president is calling for protests, and Boris Johnson is calling for revolution, because they're clearly very unhappy that Georgia may want to actually exist in a state of peace with Russia, as opposed to embracing NATO's plans to open up a second front. But at the same time, we've had a really shocking development in Japan, where the assaulted opposition parties have now been confirmed to have won the majority in the lower house there, with at least 235 seats out of a total of 465. So that would,
Is that the first time, Simon, that the Liberals have lost power in Japan? Ever? Since the Second World War?
It's the second time, sir. And the first time when they lost power, the opposition didn't really achieve very much. And so people went back, having given them a chance, to the devil they know. And unfortunately, this situation has come about again. But it's largely a result of a campaign finance scandal, but also, as happened in Korea, it's the country's population not willing to be in what their former defense minister, the temporary prime minister, who called this snap general election, like Rishi Sunak did earlier than he had to, he was also calling for Asian NATO. And so it's a bit of a double setback to NATO today, a blow against Asian NATO and a blow against Georgia entering NATO. So I thought that you'd be happy to hear about those circumstances, but it is still dependent upon Boris Johnson not being successful in thrusting yet another Central European country into a devastating civil war, and the opposition parties in Japan managing to cobble together a coalition, because otherwise it might be a Macron-type situation where the ruling party get to remain simply because the opposition can't cooperate.
I suppose I'm in a better position than you to answer this, but as I don't know the answer, I'm going to ask you. Isn't what Boris Johnson did today a criminal offence? He called for an uprising of the people of Georgia against the elected government there. Wouldn't Georgia be entitled to seek relief in the British courts and his extradition to Tbilisi?
Well, it certainly seems to meet the definition of foreign interference, if nothing else. And that was one of the issues that obviously you'll recall came up at BRICS. Now, funnily enough, I received a challenge as to whether or not I had read the entirety of the Kazan Declaration. And so I read it out, all 12,000 words, live on air. And it's now been posted as a podcast at weaponizednews.com. And funnily enough, sir, there's a few paragraphs in there that are going to be a bit of a shock to the Europeans because they're pushing back very hard against the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And when it comes to Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, they're literally saying, go on then, show us the money. Where's the 100 billion a year you promised for the energy transitions, whilst telling us that we can't use coal, oil, and natural gas? But that's the same kind of pushback from the global south that good old King Charles, your close friend, experienced at the Commonwealth Heads of Government, where they're asking first for 200 billion and now apparently for $18 trillion of slavery reparations.
18 trillion is, of course, a lot of money in anybody's language. But some fools are saying we've already paid reparations. The problem is we paid them to the slave owners, not to the actual slaves. But I didn't, because I was in Kazan and occupied by the BRICS, all I saw of King Charles's tour were somewhat overweight Samoan half-naked dancers cavorting in front of Charles and Camilla. What can you tell us about what was achieved at that tour?
So the first point that my joke of your friendship aside will probably make you more happy was they managed to make King Charles look very unhappy indeed. So that was the first achievement out of the summit. The second one was forcing your other associate, Mr. Starmer, to effectively publicly renounce Labour's election commitment to form a committee to discuss the subject of reparations, which, of course, were the numbers talking about. Ironically, the number of 18 trillion is 4 times the gross national income of Britain, everything produced in the whole country for 4 years. And that was the equivalent sum that was demanded for the ransom of King Richard when he was kidnapped on his returns from the Crusades. So I think somebody's got a good historical knowledge there. But the other thing that has been shown is all 3 candidates for the election to become the new Secretary General of the Commonwealth, a post which is now being filled by the Foreign Minister of Ghana. They were all in favor of this situation, so no manipulation was possible. There was no one candidate that they could sneak in to try and diffuse the situation. And while Starmer is saying that the British government is willing to discuss this issue in future, he's tried to rule out the inclusion of any aspect of money. But it's very clear that the rest of the organization and indeed their new Secretary General are not going to be dictated to, as Diane Abbott, your true friend, has said, in a neo-colonial manner by telling people of color what they are and are not allowed to discuss amongst themselves.
It was interesting, Simon, that so many members of the British Commonwealth chose to be in Russia for the BRICS. India was there, Nigeria was there, South Africa was there. There may have been others choosing to keep company with President Putin rather than King Charles. How significant is that?
Well, I would suggest that they probably are figuring out that joining Russia and China in the new era is probably a wise step. But as I'm sure you've mentioned elsewhere, the biggest development of BRICS was the meeting between Modi, Prime Minister of India, and Xi Jinping, President of the People's Republic of China, who confirmed that they have reached an interim agreement for the settlement of their border disputes. And as both President and Prime Minister said in a joint statement, their coming together now represents a body of almost 3 billion people. So we're talking about 40% of the world's population just in those two countries. So if they can peacefully learn to get along, having had this dispute for at least the last 5 years, and obviously conflict in the past in 1960, then it's possible that we'll see a total economic transformation of India and the most incredible shift of power to that part of the world as India pursues its goals of getting on to the UN Security Council as well. So yes, it was really quite a significant event. You'll remember that Biden's great claim to fame at the previous G20, the next one of which is due to be held in Brazil next month, was the announcement of the India-Middle East Economic Corridor. And partly because of the actions of Hamas, nothing has subsequently come of that. It's not even in the planning stages. So India is truly embracing, as indeed is Brazil and the whole east of Africa, the international north-south transportation corridor, which goes from the west side of India through Iran, through the Caspian Sea, and then all the way to the port of St. Petersburg as one of the new great logistical routes of the world, much like the previous Silk Road.
Look, let's hope, Simon, that Lula has recovered from his bathroom accident, which kept him away from Kazan. Simon of Weaponized News, a truly remarkable man who has spoken all 12,000 words of the Kazan Declaration. Rashi is on the line in California. Wants to talk about Israel and Gaza. Rashi, welcome.
George, how are you? George, I've listened to many
By the grace
discussions.
of God, good. What do you want to say?
George, I've listened to many discussions regarding the American-Israeli relationship as the dog wagging the tail or the tail wagging the dog. But at the same time, it's got to be asked, why are so many Western governments in lockstep with the United States, not just on the slaughter in Gaza, but also the slaughter in Ukraine? So are they simply vassals, or is there a third element?
Yeah.
And in my humble opinion, the Balfour Declaration was more than just a letter between His Majesty's government and Lord Rothschild. It was a contract between the West and the owners of those private central banks who've never hidden their commitment to the greater Israeli project. In that sense, these Western governments are just honoring their commitment to that contract and any other obligations they have with the banks. And does this properly explain Western complicity, not in greater Israel, but the plunder of Russian resources and the desire to steal Ukrainian land? Are they just hired thugs and muscles for these banks?
Well, no, I don't think so. I think you're overreading that situation. Balfour was responding to what at the time was a pincer movement of pro-Zionist evangelicals in the United States and in Britain, a wish to create for themselves a little loyal Jewish Ulster, in the words of the Foreign Secretary at that time, for their own imperial interests. and paragraph 2 of the Balfour Declaration, which says nothing should be done that will prejudice the existing interests, the interests of the existing non-Jewish populations. That was all just faff. So the hostility of the British to the Russians long predates Lord Balfour, long predates Putin, long predates the Bolsheviks, long predates the October Revolution, goes back into the middle, at least, of the 19th century. There's a peculiarly British hatred for Russia, which has never gone away, whatever kind of government Russia had. But interesting, Rashi, an interesting set of propositions there. Appreciate it. Let's stay in California, where Josh has an alternative to Zionism. I'm all ears, Josh. Go ahead.
Hi, George. So, Hi. Having been raised a Reformed Jew in a part of Southern California that I refer to as deep Southern California, the Inland Empire, which is rife with white supremacy, the problems affecting Semitic people has long been a focus of mine. And as my understanding of white supremacy and fascism and my understanding of what it means to be Semitic evolved throughout my life, I began to really understand that the solution to the problem of Zionism really must include something that is fundamental to Jewish politics, which is the safety of Jewish people. And again, as my understanding of Semitism, who and what it means to be Semitic evolved, I began to understand that the true safety and the true appropriate place for Jewish people exists in the United States, in the South and in the West. These are the places where Semitic people, and by Semitic people, I don't simply mean Jewish people. I mean Jews, Arabs, and trans-African people, which is how I refer to African Americans, because I think it's a much more accurate term. The shelter, which Machzeh is the name of this movement, and fortress exists within the West and in the South of the United States, much more appropriately than it exists in the Holy Land, because fundamental to the Machzeh principle is to seek refuge in the people of the land with a deference and respect to the indigenous populations.
Well, that's a fascinating proposition. It might have been better to found their settler colonial state in the south of California. After all, they did think of settling the south part of Argentina, Patagonia, where many of the people speak with a Welsh accent. So many Welsh settlers were there. But the Seychelles, Uganda, and other African territories were seriously surveyed as the possible site of this Zionist settler state. We could have a discussion, you and I. You seem like a very interesting chap. Time's against us, though, about the extent to which all these people you refer to are actually Semitic. I mean, I'm not Semitic. If I became Jewish tomorrow, I would not become Semitic, but I'd be able to claim anyone who was against me guilty of anti-Semitism, even though the last thing in the world I am is Semitic. We could have a debate over whether people who converted to Judaism in East and Central Europe, but who are not allowed to take DNA tests in Israel to see where their actual DNA originates. The only guaranteed Semites that I know are Arabs. And they're the ones that the Zionist movement is trying to drive out and subjugate. But Josh, that was a fascinating story. I hope you'll come back again and talk about it further. Monkey Boy says, if King Charles is the head of Britain's armed forces, why is he allowing them to support Israel's genocide of the Palestinian people? Well, he's not, of course, in charge of Britain's armed forces, which are, in any case, so small they could fit into the Aston Villa football stadium, which is far from being our biggest. And, of course, the main support that we are giving to Israel's genocide is financial, material, and diplomatic. And, of course, not to forget the chorus of hyenas barking in the British media in support of that genocide. Gavin Sangster says, that Sky News guy needed an Imodium after you'd finished with them. Other anti-diarrhea tablets are available. Bertha is on the line in Spain on Trump and the West Bank. Bertha, welcome.
Thank you very much, George. It's a real pleasure to speak to you. I have been a fan for decades.
Thank you so much.
I admire your honesty and integrity. God bless you. We need more men like you.
Thank you.
My issue, when you mentioned earlier that you believe that Trump will get in without any problems whatsoever, I fear the same. One of the things that I picked up on during his first term in office was his involvement, or his son-in-law, Jared Kushner's involvement in American political affairs, which I found extremely disturbing because he's not a politician. I don't believe he was old enough to lend advice to the leader of the American nation. He had worked as a property developer. His father before him did the same. What I discovered about Kushner was his link to Netanyahu from childhood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then I picked up on some interviews held by a gentleman called Lex Fridman in the USA, who interviewed Jared Kushner during Trump's first term in office. And one of the things that Kushner was doing, and he openly discusses it during the interview, is that he was developing plans for the development of the West Bank, property development. And this extended into the Gaza region. And it was I was astonished, I was taken aback by his attitude that it didn't seem to be noticeable to him that there were human beings living there already. Even in this day and age, it's as if there is a complete mental block that humans actually exist that are not Israel. They're not Israelis.
Yeah.
They are.
Well, look, it is important that people of your age and mine retain the capacity to have our minds blown. It would be a great pity if we became so inured to all this monstrosity around us that we accepted these things as read. You're absolutely correct that Netanyahu himself has slept in Kushner's childhood bed, presumably with Kushner sleeping elsewhere, but that's how close the two families were. And now that Kushner is Trump's son-in-law, he used the first term of President Trump to make a very considerable fortune indeed. Most of it from Saudi Arabia, where he formed a very close friendship with MBS, Mohammed bin Sultan, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia and destined one day to be king. He made a fortune during the period he was shuttling around selling the Elmer Gantry product of the Abraham Accords that were, of course, nothing to do with Abraham and didn't produce any accord. You say he was surveying the West Bank for property development. That's certainly true. But he, most recently, in the last couple of months, has been talking about building apartments on the Gaza shoreline. But again, I say what I keep saying, Bertha. All of these things presuppose an end to the Palestinian resistance. Otherwise, the things you're going to build in the West Bank and sell to rich Americans are not going to survive, or if they survive, they're not going to be very safe places to live. Ditto, even more, the beachfront properties in Gaza. That presupposes that neither the Palestinian resistance, nor the Lebanese resistance, nor the Yemenis, nor the Iraqis, nor the Iranians, that presupposes that nobody is going to come along and knock them all down because you're building them on the bones of the Palestinian people whose land you've stolen in order to build them. So I greatly appreciate your kind words, and I greatly appreciate your sagacity and the research that you've done on this subject. But I urge you not to dismay. The best laid schemes of men gang aft agley, as Robert Burns famously said. And that will go for any schemes that Jared Kushner has for Trump's second term. Let me draw your attention to my Tuesday night show, Have It Out with Galloway. It's like this show, but with moving pictures of the guests. Watch this. If you want to join me on Have It Out with Galloway, you can be the audience member on that video wall so that I can see as well as hear you. Come and have it out with Galloway. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. www.haveitoutwithgalloway.com.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Now, Ram Hasib says, Mr. Galloway, glad you and your wife are back safe and sound. Good luck tonight, and thank you for your determination to inform us what's going on. You both deserve 2 big bags of chips. May I take this opportunity to educate my American audience that when I say I'm taking Gayatri for chips, I don't mean I'm taking her for crisps. Neither, God forbid, does it mean I'm going to take her to a casino and get her some casino chips, because both of these misconceptions have been passed on to us in the chat. I'm talking about potatoes fried as chips. I myself don't eat them. I'm trying to avoid carbs. But Gayatri, who remains slim no matter how many chips she eats, quite loves them and will insist upon being taken for them after this show, as always. What's rattling, Gayatri?
Oh my God, it's so funny. It's so funny you should say that, because I have an email from Sam McTeague saying exactly that. Mr. Galloway, MOATS being a global university, perhaps you could explain to your American, your Canadian, Australian, and other listeners and viewers worldwide that chips are not bags of crisp or casino tokens, but fried spuds bought from a chippy, which is not a carpenter or French or perhaps freedom fries. So this is from Tamektik, very funny. So yeah, chips, just as you explained.
Freedom fries, yes. Even the most reactionary American will remember freedom fries.
Was so funny. So we're back from Kazan. What an amazing experience that was. One of the highlights, media highlights, was the interview you had with Sky News. It's going viral. It's into its millions because lots of people have pirated it and commented on it with the video. MoveToRussia.com says, George is ever so courteous, and it's good to see he has his own camera person with him to film it, just to have the full exchange for the interview. Thank you. That camera person will be myself. I just happened to come out of the lavatories and catch George with the Sky News journalist in time. I immediately got my camera ready. And unfortunately, because it wasn't live, Sky News decided, upon seeing the footage, that it will not air it. But we had it. We had the whole interview in full, so we put it out, and now it's going viral in the millions. Jay Ross says, Mr. Galloway, ever patient and accommodating. It was evidently clear that this was not George Galloway's first interview, but it certainly felt that it was so for the young Sky News reporter. Are all their reporters incapable of lateral thinking at all? And Monkey Boy says, George, you left yet another
Gayatri,
Sky News reporter.
let me stop you there. Yeah, let me stop you there. He was not young. He's 38 years old. He just looked like a Boy Scout, overgrown, trousers too short for him, with his upper-class English posture, with his hand on his hip, seeking to establish dominance over me. He's never run the mean streets of Scotland like I have, and nobody establishes dominance over me. And of course, he's a music graduate from Oxford University. What better qualification could you have for being a Sky News political reporter, and as he called himself, the Moscow correspondent? But he had no answer to your final question. How come Sky has a Moscow correspondent where no Russian broadcaster is allowed to have a London correspondent? Over to you.
Over to me. Ditto. Bubble Wrap says, I've never heard any speaker be able to handle the press with the composure, eloquence, intelligence, knowledge, and straightforward truth that George Galloway does. He is a statesman by nature, and he just knows how to do it. And then Matthew White says, to quote you, George, they don't like it up them. Or maybe some of them do. And this is so funny because following that interview, we started making mottos. We should actually relaunch this video, and instead of having Sky News in the ticker saying Sly News, or Roger Seeley says, you've just been Gallowayed. Or the one that we have been coining is George Galloway, flame grilling Sky News since 2006. That's how long they've been trying to get you, but unfortunately it's been the other way around. So that was a great takeaway from the overall historic event in Kazan of BRICS 2024. Over to the poll, is America headed for civil war? Surprising or not, the reason for the 70-30-ish divide in the result is that most people believe that Americans need or deserve civil war themselves after having spread it worldwide. Max says they will. This society is so very violent and they will end up killing each other. And maybe they will help the world to live in peace. Jess Blue says, yes, but unfortunately it won't be anything like a movie. On the other hand, Uncle Stukas says, for example, no, the US isn't even close to a civil war. Most liberals are way too comfortable in their middle-class bubble to fight for anything. The conservatives have nothing but performative masculinity, while they worship the state and the rich who screw them. So for them, there's no reason to fight. And Tim says, I think Trump will win, and so there's no need for insurrection. And I really cannot see Harris supporters being the civil war type. And then on the other hand, of course, City Guy USA says people in the US are way too busy trying to stay above water. So most people don't even have a clue about Gaza or Ukraine. They know what the weather for today is supposed to be, but even that seems manipulated. And on the other matter, apart from lack of conviction and lack of ideology and being out of their comfort zone, cynical order says the problem with war is that you have to be fit. You know, after marching a mile with a pack and set weapon, it is pretty clear that most Americans would collapse and then go home. And then Kai Makamesser says, I know a couple of MAGAs and they only see two options. Trump wins and there will be a legal purge. Or Trump wins and the Dems steal the election, and then there will be civil war. And the option that Kamala wins is completely unthinkable to them. So that's interesting, isn't it? Were you surprised by the poll results?
Yes, I think it's hyperbole for many of the reasons you've just listed. The liberals that are most overwrought at the possibility of a Trump victory are more the pussy hat type than the AK-47 type. I don't think they're going to go to war for Kamala Harris. Some of them are ostentatiously canceling their subscriptions to the Washington Post, the latest of whom was Stephen King, the author. He's cancelled his subscription to the Washington Post, but he has not removed his books from sale from Amazon, the sister company of the Washington Post. Thank you, Gayatri. Chips are beckoning. Only a few minutes away. I'll see you. Sarkar, the legend, is in Glasgow on the Georgia election results. Go ahead, Sarkar.
Thank you so much, George. George, first of all, thank you for introducing me that way, but you're the legend for putting that Sky Sports dude back to nursery. I know nursery kids when I see one because my boy goes to nursery. Thank you so much for that one. Now, George, back to a serious question with the Georgian election. Once again, the West have shown. Every time you throw a banana skin at the others, hoping that Russia would fall, you end up falling. Congratulations to the West. They keep on repeating the same mistakes again and again. Georgia has done the sensible thing. Yeah. They know that EU never made Georgia part of their member, which the Ukrainians did not understand. The pro-EU candidate who lost is now throwing his toys out of the pram, saying that, oh, the election was rigged and stolen. For years and years, Georgia and many of the Eastern European countries have been used as a proxy by the West just to poke Russia in the eye. This election, in the grand scheme of things, makes us realize that the Eastern Europeans who for years grabbed the bait of the West have realized it's much more beneficial to do business with Russia, who've got an abundance of oil and gas resources, than with the West, which is a dying breed. When will the West realize that everyone is not as stupid as Zelensky? They won't grab their bait. And if you spit at someone much more higher than you, the spit falls back on your face. Will the West finally realize, George? That's my question, basically.
Well, it's a very good question, and I'm in a good place to answer it because, as you know, Gayatri and I are just back from the provincial city of Kazan, albeit a million-plus population and a capital of a Muslim republic in Russia called Tatarstan. Place was booming, Sarkar. I mean, proper blooming. The people were well-dressed. The streets were completely spotless, not just the streets that the leaders were driving down, but all the streets. We walked them. I did 10,000 steps every single day of the time we were in Kazan. I'm in a position to tell you that Kazan is more prosperous, more clean, more harmonious, with no hint of menace or crime than any Western city, any one at all. Certainly Glasgow or London, certainly Los Angeles or New York. Kazan was basically like a film set, almost like a Potemkin village. It is completely flawless, pristine, beautiful. And the people are spending money like Billy-O. In the shopping malls, all of which I visited, there's scarcely a Western labeled good on offer. The only brand name I saw, and it was above a shop, it may predate the sanctions, was Max Mara. Every other Western business is gone, and every other label from Western countries is gone. And I personally think we'll never get these markets back. Every new car is a Russian car or a Chinese car. Every new car is most likely to be an EV. This in a land where oil and gas are the milk and honey of the country, but EVs are everywhere, and they are things of beauty. I couldn't actually read the brand name because of the Cyrillics, but there were no Western cars. I don't think we'll ever get these markets back, and I don't think that we deserve to get these markets back. Being British, of course, I wish for better relations between Britain and Russia. I wish for our businesses to be able to sell their goods and services again in Russia. I wish that as the leader of the Workers' Party of Britain. I've got to wish British business and the workers who work in those businesses. But I'd be lying if I told you that I think that these markets are going to be recovered by Western countries. We have just stolen scores of billions of euros and pounds belonging to Russia and given it to Ukraine. That's Russian money which they foolishly entrusted to Western financial institutions, and it has been stolen and given to Zelensky to fire missiles against the Russians. Why would Russia trust us again? I don't think the current leadership of Russia will ever trust us again. Until there's a new leadership in Russia in 20, 30 years from now, a new generation, maybe things will begin to soften, but I don't think so. I think we're locked out now of these markets. I think that Russia now looks east. After all, it has sold all that it produces, everything, from nickel to oil to gas to wheat, and it now possesses the entirety of the Donbass, which is the only industrial area of the Ukraine. And it's not going to give these areas back. And so Russia's economic strength and its natural resources, its raw materials, are about to be substantially replenished by these Novorossian, new Russian lands, which their army has liberated in the east of Ukraine. That will leave a rump Ukrainian state, which will be an entirely agrarian state, the land all owned by BlackRock. That's if a Western Ukrainian rump state even exists by the end of this conflict. We'll have to wait and see. So I said at the time, as you well know, Sarkar, we have fashioned a deadly boomerang and thrown it at the Russians, and it has come back only to smash into our own faces. It was an act of self-harm on a gargantuan scale, and our leaders did that to us. Now, I'm not an educated man. I'm sorry to disappoint some of you. I left school at 16 and went to work in a factory. I'm a graduate of no university except the University of Life. If I could see that, how come the Oxbridge public school educated oafs who run the British state could not see it? How come the overeducated Oxbridge oafs who run the media in Britain actually laugh out loud when I said, Russia will not be destroyed by your sanctions. We will be destroyed by those sanctions. They laughed. Oh, how they laughed. But they're not laughing now. Neither is Gayatri, because she wants to get out for her chips. Anthony Wedgwood said, Ghadi did a full 1-hour interview with Rania Khalek a few days ago. A must watch. And this is an important one that somebody has written in, and I want to say that I agree with them. Please stop offending the peoples of Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Paraguay, Colombia, Cuba, Mexico, Venezuela, Canada, Peru, Uruguay, etc., by using the name of their continent only to refer to the USA. If France had decided to call itself the United Provinces of Europe, would you then call France Europe? How would the people in the rest of Europe react? A fair point. Jorge Clavery will try to correct that error in the future. It's something that we grew up with, and a man of my age and class sometimes has difficulty in shaking off the fleas. Well, it's been marvelous for me. I hope it was for you. I was feeling pretty lousy when I sat down here this evening. I think we've had quite a good show. Come back on Wednesday. Why don't you?